Welcome back to Better Than Before. I'm Tony Richards, and today we've got a special guest. She's billed as a joy magnet, love expert, creative inspirer, and obstacle obliterator. She's a widely published poet, essay writer, and has written a book called When Your Heart Breaks, It's Opening to Love, Healing and Finding Love After an Affair, Heartbreak, or Divorce. She's also written an advice column for the Sacramento News and Review for 20 years. She's a relationship expert, and we're delighted to have Joey Garcia on our show today. Joey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you this morning.
You bet. So excited to have you on today. And we've talked about some of your achievements and some of your accolades here, but tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, my background's rather wide. I worked as a reporter in newspapers, radio, television, and magazines. I've been a public relations consultant for corporations, and my heart is deeply engaged with personal growth, my own and that of others. So I've spent a lot of time in the personal growth field, just learning as much as I can so I can be as helpful and supportive to others as I can.
I've learned a lot about art over the years because one of my neighbors who lives down the street in my neighborhood, John Fennell, who's also a professor at the University of Missouri, is quite the artist. And I also noticed that you're an artist as well. So you have all these creative outlets. How did you become an artist?
Oh, thank you. It was a childhood love, and it's just something I kept going with. The same with writing. And I feel like one of the things that happens to people as they mature is they're encouraged to be very focused and singular. And I wanted to be more of a Renaissance person in that I wanted to use all my parts. I wanted to learn as much as possible and go as deeply as possible into each one of my interests. So that's where I got engaged with art.
That's great. And so you're a poet, you're an artist, you're a writer, you have all this stuff going. How did you become a relationship and a love expert?
Well, curiously enough, the newspaper here in Sacramento asked me to write an advice column. Actually, they asked me to write a column, and I thought, I could write a column about antics in the city council and, political issues. We're in the state capitol. And the editor said, no, an advice column like Dear Abby. And I thought, I do not want to do that. That sounds terrible. Some people really love to give other people advice, and that was not where my heart and interest was. But she encouraged me. She kept asking me until I said yes. And so I did a little test run answering questions from people in-house at the newspaper, and the editor loved my work and asked me to do it from there forward. So it's been 22 years, and that's a fantastic run for an advice columnist.
Sometimes the transition that we get into in our life comes from the most unusual places, right?
Yeah.
So you've done that for 20 years, writing a column. When did you first write? When did you discover writing?
I remember writing as a child and wanting to write stories and being very, writing poetry and winning poetry contests as a child. And that was something that was a really powerful experience. The things that I love, just puzzling something out and spending time in solitude and, just being engaged in that process of timelessness, not operating by the clock. I think creativity is really about living outside of that realm of schedule, right? So it's very powerful to do that. And I loved it as a child. And so I've just given myself more and more free rein to play in that field.
That's awesome. I've heard various theories, and I always like to ask writers about writer's block. I've heard some people say that they believe it, that writers do get it. Other people say, no, there's no such thing as writer's block. It's our perfectionism that's getting in the way. What do you think about writer's block? Do you think you ever experience that? And if so, what do you use to kind of break yourself out of that?
I don't experience writer's block, but I do think of it as being stuck in the ego. So, there's a lot of fear around how we might be seen and whether or not we'll be accepted and whether we are acceptable. And that's what comes up. That's really what comes up. When a writer is looking at a page or a visual artist is looking at a blank canvas, if there's fear that arises, I'm not good enough or anything along those lines, those kinds of fears, that's what stops someone from the flow that is trying to move through them to express itself on the page or the canvas.
Do you think we've become kind of nitpicky as a society about the things that we judge people over, or do you think that fear is actually real?
I think that there are real fears, and there's nothing wrong with that because it's just a life experience. The issue is, like any other life experience, are we going to engage with it in a conscious way, or are we going to allow it to drive us unconsciously toward an outcome that creates chaos in our life? So it's always coming back to that reality of, who am I? Why am I here? Who is the divine to me? Who is God to me? And how am I going to express that in my life while supporting and inspiring those around me?
That's great. That's a great viewpoint. So when you have that and when you have those fears and you get stuck, what do you do to get yourself out of it? Do you have a routine you kind of play on yourself or trick you use on yourself to get yourself going?
Yes, it's not so much a trick. If I have a fear arising in me, one of the first things I like to do, if possible, is sit down with my journal and look at it, take it out of the realm of my mind and put it on paper. Because somehow putting on paper for me, and maybe because I'm a writer, but it makes it less scary. It makes it more tangible and easier to face and deal with. If that's not possible, I will actually engage in a mental process of having a conversation with myself about the fear, asking myself if it's real and something I need to attend to, or if it's just drama. So that's kind of like the difference between intuition and instinct. Instinct is very fear-based, and intuition is like a clear reality kind of coming through me, like life coming through me. And that's what I end up doing. And if that doesn't help, I will reach out to my sister or a friend, someone in my inner circle that I trust and who I know is very direct and honest and will tell me the truth.
I love that whole concept of making it tangible because it seems like when we can make it tangible, it seems easier to deal with.
Absolutely. So what people tend to do is just live in their head and not understand that, for example, they're having an emotion, they are not the emotion, or they're having a thought, they are not the thought. We have 10,000 or more thoughts per minute or second? I don't know what the actual stat is, but we tend to pay close attention to the most dramatic and fearful and exhausting thoughts instead of noticing the other things. So that's one other tool that I use is just starting to pay attention to something else. Let's say I have a lot of fear going on, then I will notice really beautiful things around me, things that I'm grateful for, people, experiences I'm grateful for. And by focusing my attention on what's working, on what's good, it kind of brings balance to the other so that I can find the middle path.
Gratitude's a great tool to have in your toolbox. It works for me a lot. So another creative outlet that you've explored in the past has been a podcast. And I went to your website, listened to a couple of your shows. They were very good. It's on hiatus right now, but you're planning a new podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm doing a podcast called Start the Press. I've been working with a lot of authors, and I launched this year the Belize Writers Conference, which was the first writers conference ever held in Belize, and I established the country's first ever writer in residence program. So I've been working with authors and helping them find more publicity for their books. I find that a lot of the ways that authors have been taught to seek publicity just really don't work anymore in the new, field of how, let's say, a newsroom is really operating versus the kind of idea that people have about newsrooms based on movies.
Right.
So that's the podcast, Start the Press, and I've been doing presentations around the country, teaching that technique.
I have all these scenes from broadcast news that are playing out in my head now.
Yeah.
If you're going to have to work, Belize is a great place to do it, right?
That's right. I love going there. I've been working in Belize since 2004, working in the schools, providing free summer school programs for children in Belize and scholarships for kids. in Belize, and that's been a great experience. And what it's taught me, though, is that literacy and literature in that country need to be elevated. So that's why I launched the Writers Conference. And I was born in Belize. I have a real connection to the country and lots of experience working there.
That's great. I've visited there a couple of times. You're a relationship expert. So you help people with relationship issues. What are some of the most common issues you see and help people with?
Well, I think that across the board, most people lack good conflict resolution skills. They think they have them, but they don't. And going to a workshop on conflict resolution skills doesn't mean that those skills have been developed, because they have to be practiced. And a lot of times people need sort of direct one-on-one coaching around conflict resolution. So that's one of the biggest things. And I think people, especially women, tend to confuse being nice with with everything. So
Well, give me an example.
so they think they're being nice. Perhaps they hesitate to say something, and really they're just being dishonest. They're not being direct and honest and truthful. It's the same, the sort of trope, the joke about, do I look fat in this dress? And men are afraid to say the truth because women will overreact. That it's the same idea. So women have learned that it's better to lie, and men too, better to lie than to tell the truth. And that's not helpful in a relationship.
So how do you help people get to the truth then and help them with that? I mean, I'm sure it's very complicated, but just simply, like, what's the root of getting down to being more honest with each other?
Great question, Tony. And the root is a willingness to be honest with oneself. We really work to, get to the point where the person, man or woman that I'm working with, a teenager, I work with teenagers as well, admit that they want people to be more honest. Usually everyone has stories about how hurt they are or how they've been betrayed because someone's been dishonest with them, and yet they are, continually dishonest themselves in big and small ways. So if they are more honest with themselves, it's much easier to be someone who will receive honesty from others, which encourages others to be more honest. And when people are more honest with each other, then they can be, more trustworthy and more trusting, because the reason people have trust issues is because they're dishonest with themselves.
So that fear of losing a relationship or fear of hurting the relationship is actually going to undermine the relationship itself, right? Am I making sense there?
Yeah, that works. Absolutely.
And in a world where all of us wear masks to some degree, we all have a desire to be liked. We all have a desire to be accepted. We all have a desire to have relationships. Those masks vary, in different people. My own philosophy with my relationship with my wife has just been, I want that to be the most honest relationship there is, because I want something that's built on authenticity. And, I have some friends too that I feel that I can be very honest with, and they can be very honest with me, but it's so valuable to have that.
True. The issue around masks, or, the Greeks said persona, right, is that people feel like they have to play different roles while engaged with different people or different arenas of their lives. And the truth is, when we talk about authenticity, we're talking about being consistent. We're talking about an integrity of, connection. So I'm going to be the same person consistently in every arena of my life. We dislike when politicians have a different mask for each person they're talking to, right? But we ourselves are often fearful of being consistent. So it comes back to, what kind of person do I want to be in the world?
That's one of the things that I highly value about my relationship with my spouse is that, and I think I have a few close relationships and generally people who would be able to do this too, but I know I'm going to screw up, right? I know I'm going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, misuse a term or something every now and then. But I do have that relationship with my spouse where she always knows my intent and she always knows my heart. And I have to have that as a person. Do you find that in a lot of relationships?
Yeah, intention is so important, and the way you've described it is just, spot on. I think the thing is, you over time, you've built this love where you trust each other. You're right in that, no one is perfect. Everybody has issues. Everybody has drama. and unresolved wounds. It's the same thing that we want teenagers to do, right? To see the whole person, not to see someone as all good or all bad, but to see someone in their fullness, which is, their beauty and their gifts and their talents and, their shortcomings and challenges. Because when we engage in that level of honesty of seeing someone as they are, they can be who they are and grow into the person they're being called to be.
So we talked about conflict resolution, we talked about trust. What other components around communication do you think are important in relationships?
Well, communication, the word means to become one with another person. Communication, community, communion, it's about an experience of oneness, of union. And what most people do is try to separate from another person. So my classic story is I was in my house writing a poem, actually working in the back of my house, and I decided I should go to the front of my home and close the windows because it was getting dark. And I walked into my kitchen and there was a young man straddling the windowsill breaking into my house. I could have screamed and I could have grabbed a knife. I was in the kitchen. I knew where the knives were. And I could have said, "You don't belong here. What are you doing here? Get out of my house." All of which would have been arguing with reality, which is a waste of time. But because I have such a long practice of this kind of personal development work and an awareness of myself and of union, I just stood my ground and said, "What are you doing with your life?" And he froze on my windowsill, looking at me. And then I yelled it the second time, "What are you doing with your life?" And he seemed to ponder the question. And then he began to slowly withdraw from the window. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to confront a potential burglar in that way, but it's a story that, and I have lots of stories such as that, but a story of engaging with someone as one. Now, I felt comfortable. He was a teenager. I'm comfortable working with teenagers, etc. But I think what we tend to do in an argument or whatever, we tend to separate in a crisis rather than join.
How do you get to a point where you can define that somebody's in a bad relationship? What does a bad relationship mean?
That's a great question because, you know, it's different for everyone. And we do really like formulas. Human beings love formulas. But I think that a bad relationship is one in which there is chaos, in which there is control that is causing suffering. It's stagnant. There's no growth going on for either both as a couple. And that there's an absence of genuine love. People tend to think an absence of love is really that loss of the kind of highs and lows of infatuation, and they don't understand that that's supposed to go away. But really, an absence of love means that they're not putting their partner, the relationship, their own personal growth first, which has to happen.
Yeah. And so when that happens and people kind of fall into that, why do people continue on in those kinds of situations?
We come back to fear, and there's sometimes fear that comes from religion. You should stay with the same person your whole life, or you're a bad sinner. There's fear that they themselves have done something wrong, or they won't find someone else. There's fear of being alone. Lots of people are not comfortable with solitude. They are dependent and they don't think that they have enough capacity for independence. There's so many reasons why someone would stay in a bad relationship. And, that was a tradition for many people for generations. It's only really in the very tail end of the 20th century, beginning of this 21st century, that people have begun to say, you know what, marriage is great and not being married is great too. Being single is great and being married is great too. Living with someone's okay. And, these are all just lifestyle choices, not a judgment of someone's spiritual capacity or lack thereof.
So let's back up to the other end of the relationship. You meet somebody and time is going by and, it's escalating as far as the time you spend with them and all of that. But what would be ways that you really want to get to know the other person in a relationship before you take, the next big step with them?
One of my favorite ways of discerning that and sharing it with others comes from a friend's husband, actually a former spiritual counselor that I went to. Her husband, who is a corporate trainer, said to me that he suggests that no one go into business unless they've seen their potential business partner sick, angry, and drunk. Not at the same time.
Right, right.
Not that everyone drinks or should be drunk, but his point was seeing someone at their worst and how they behave towards you will teach you a lot about the reality of that person. It kind of goes back to the earlier question you posed about personas, about masks. Those are situations when someone's mask is off because they are so vulnerable because of the situation, and we do get to see them. So that's one of the things about, can you stand your partner at their worst? Because that's going to happen in the relationship. So if you can stand them at their worst, then loving them at their best is easy.
Is there any one or two top pieces of advice you could share with our audience here as we get close to the end of the time together?
Well, I think one of the really important things about love is to understand that telling someone the truth is an act of love. And, being someone to whom the truth can be told is an act of love. Learning to heal our own wounds instead of walking around and saying, you're just like my father, or you're just like my mother. Healing our own wounds is the greatest act of love of all, because it affects not only ourselves, but those around us, and really everyone we encounter.
Yes, in my model of coaching people, it's take care of yourself and grow yourself. Step 2, take care of your relationships and grow your relationships. And I think those two things are extremely important, no matter what you're talking about. If you're talking about a career, you're talking about a marriage, you're talking about partnerships, relationships play such a huge part in our lives. And a lot of us, myself included, we could all get better at it.
And I always joke, I'm called a relationship expert because that's a very quick and easy label. But I'm learning. And obviously, with my story began with me not wanting to do this work, then I can understand, and others can understand, that expertise is an ongoing experience of study, and that includes self-study.
Joy, you've done so many creative things and you continue to do them. I'm just kind of curious, is there anything else you think you'd like to try or do you haven't done yet?
Well, great question. I'll be walking the Camino de Santiago this summer, and that'll be a lot of fun to be on that pilgrimage and take the ancient path. And working with a literary agent to get my novel published, and hope to have that out next year. So we'll see what happens next.
That's great. I'm so glad you joined us today. So much good information to share with our audience. I've got a standard list of closing questions I want to ask you, and I'm going to shoot these to you one right after the other. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. Best memory that immediately comes to mind for you?
Oh, I think probably the first time I went to Disneyland. It was a surprise my parents gave me. It was fun.
Number one hero in your life?
Wow. My sister.
Why is that?
Because she and I are so different, and she loves me without condition, but boy, she can whoop me upside the head and set me on the path again.
Top value you subscribe to?
Honesty.
Most important person in your life?
Again, probably my sister.
Your favorite thing?
Silence.
Your favorite food?
Chocolate.
I think I may know the answer to this, but I'm just going to ask, most beautiful place you've been to?
Belize.
Yep. Thought that's what you'd say.
Yeah.
If you could describe success in one word, what would it be?
Oh, integrity.
How do you want to be remembered?
As one who loved and taught love well.
Advice for a younger Joey Garcia?
Just go for it.
Good. What's your favorite sound?
Silence.
And the best lesson you've learned?
Oh, the best lesson I've learned is that things are not the way they seem. So go deeper. Always go deeper. Peel back another layer and you'll get the nectar you're looking for.
Phenomenal. She's a joy magnet, a love expert, creative inspirer, and obstacle obliterator. Joy, tell everybody how to find you and tell them about your website and how to contact you.
Yeah, joeygarcia.com is my website, and I would love to connect with people there. I have my blog there, and you can also connect with me on Instagram. It's Ask Joey Garcia, and on Twitter at Ask Joey Garcia.
All right. So honored that you joined us today and sharing a lot of relationship advice and just sharing some of yourself with our audience. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tony, for reaching out. I'm so glad we connected on Twitter, and I look forward to continuing a partnership together.
Receive weekly coaching tips from Tony Richards, delivered straight to your inbox. Whether you're a CEO or an entrepreneur, Tony can help you reach your goals and give you a competitive edge within your industry. Tony's Monday Morning Coaching Memo covers topics ranging from leadership development to teamwork to company culture and more. Text the word leadership to 38470 to sign up for Tony's Monday Morning Coaching Memo, or sign up online at clearvisiondevelopment.com.